If you live somewhere where it gets maybe just a little bit too cold for you to grow all the things that you want to grow in your garden, and you're not quite ready to let go of your dream of growing those things in your garden, today I'm going to go over with you what your options are as far as extending your season and making it an actually viable option for you to grow these things that your climate doesn't want you to. I'm going to try to go through these in order of easiest all the way down to hardest. And it's important to note that some of the easier options are not going to provide as much protection as some of the harder options. And you're going to have to kind of decide where you fit on the scale of what your plant actually needs, and also balance what energy and resources you have to create the situation that would help it live over winter. So the easiest thing that you can do to extend your season a little bit, this works with plants that need just a few degrees more warmth than you currently have. So this is for, like I talked about in the last video, the oregano. It may or may not survive the low temp depending on how cold it gets for the winter. So I might look into doing something like this if I was going to get a temperature that I thought might be kind of close to killing it. And so what you can do is just simply cover them with something during the night when it's going to be really, really cold, whether that be fabric or some sort of plastic. This will keep some of the heat in and can keep it, anywhere from 1 to 5 degrees warmer, depending on exactly what material you are using to cover your plants. As far as fabric goes, there are specifically made frost fabrics that you can use for this, but bed sheets also work pretty well. You would want to go for something like frost fabric if you were planning on leaving it out on the plant for multiple days in a row. Maybe there's like an entire month where you're worried about your plants getting just a little bit too cold. You would want to go for frost fabric as opposed to like an old bed sheet. Meanwhile, if you have just 1 or 2 days that you're worried about, an old bed sheet will be perfectly fine. And if you, instead of messing with fabric, want to use a container to just simply cover it, I've seen people use clear plastic totes or like storage boxes for this. You can also maybe use plastic milk gallon jugs that are empty. People will kind of cut one end off and then use it to cap over their plants. Anything that you can come up with that is, again, going to be kind of closed and keep that warmth in is going to probably do a good job. So the next easiest thing to try, in my opinion, is just simply keeping it as a potted plant that can be outside during the summer and inside during the winter. A lot of plants can be done this way. I've seen people do citrus and figs this way. You could maybe even get away with, I think coffee trees done this way. You could maybe try dwarf varieties of fruiting trees, so like a dwarf pomegranate or a dwarf apple tree, something like that. Dwarf specifically for these larger plants would be a really good thing to look for if you're looking for varieties that you can keep in pots and then keep indoors somewhere. And this is a step harder than just simply covering something with fabric, because one, you do have to have the space for however many pots you want to keep indoors, and you also have to have a way for them to get light, and usually that means grow lights. Very, very few of you are going to have sunrooms that get enough light for these plants, and most of the time you will end up just having to set up some sort of grow light above the plants for the winter time. All right, next on the list, as we move just slightly more difficult, is something called a cold frame. This is essentially a teeny tiny greenhouse. It is a frame that is built up from the ground with, usually people will get an old window to make as the lid, and this is a somewhat permanent structure for most people that you use to grow things. Generally, people use them for lettuces, but you can use them for other things. And it would keep that section of your garden just a little bit warmer, exactly like a mini greenhouse would. But it is more accessible to build than an actual greenhouse, and it is also going to take up a much smaller area if you already have a smaller garden to start with. On a very similar tier to that is a collapsible greenhouse. You'll see these sold a lot in the spring at your home goods type stores. They are generally a flexible plastic that is going to be draped over some sort of hollow piping situation, so that you have like a small-ish greenhouse that you can kind of set up and take down in the winter. These are generally the most affordable type of greenhouse to start with, and they do give you, a fair bit more space than something like a cold frame. However, these are generally not big enough for you to really grow anything in the ground for, multiple years. These are more directed at people who want to start seeds or keep a couple of potted plants outdoors over the winter. So they are definitely getting there, getting better, and accessible in their own way, but not as good if you wanted to, say, have a bunch of citrus trees in a climate where it gets way too cold. Next up on our list, and something that you could use to keep citrus trees in year-round, would be kind of a regular standard greenhouse. This is a permanent shed-sized structure that you would put out in your garden. All the walls are made of windows, and generally these types of structures can hold up for many, many years. They do take up more space than those collapsible ones, but because they are a permanent structure, you can actually just grow stuff in the ground in your greenhouse and have that live there year over year and be very protected. One of my friend's moms grows things like banana trees in her large greenhouse, and those actually stay warm enough to produce bananas. This might be really limiting for you if, like me, you can't afford to buy such a structure, or if you just don't have the space for it, which is really unfortunate and why it is so high on the difficulty list. All right, and our final level on difficulty is going to be something called a high tunnel. This is very similar, almost like a commercial greenhouse, you might call it. And this is going to be a very large structure that is generally another draped plastic structure, but the plastic is going to be a much higher quality than those little collapsible ones I was talking about. And they are going to be a lot more expensive. Generally, they take up a large amount of area as well. So you're looking at at least 30 to 60 feet in any direction for those most of the time. And of course, if you don't have the space for that, then you don't have the space for that. But it is also inaccessible as far as cost, because these are very large structures that do have a lot of upfront cost to them. And so that can definitely be prohibitive. So again, depending on what you're trying to grow and the resources you have, you may or may not be able to make it work for a specific plant that needs protection in your area. Just to remind you, we go from all the way from fabric or some sort of plastic cover to maybe keeping it as a potted plant, to maybe having a cold frame, and kind of on that same level, potentially a collapsible greenhouse. And then we move up to regular greenhouse, and finally high tunnel. So wherever you land on that list of time, resources, and requirements, you can kind of think about that and make your list accordingly. So if you're just now finding this and you are not already part of the course, this video is part of a series of a free course that I'm hosting here on YouTube, especially for beginner gardeners, to help you get your garden planned out for the year, but also so that I can help you throughout the year, making sure that your garden is actually going according to plan. Like I said earlier in the series, I think a lot of these types of courses will leave you hanging after you get your initial plan set up, and I actually have a fair bit of content for you after that that will help you keep up with your garden and make sure that you don't get burnt out. So that being said, I wish happy gardening to all of you, and I will see you in the next video.